The night was thick with silence, the kind that settled deep into the bones, stretching across the vast kingdom of Umudike like an unseen shroud. Even the wind held its breath as King Ezioka and Queen Nwanika, their footsteps heavy with anticipation, ascended the sacred hill toward the shrine of the Oracle of Arachukwu. Their torches flickered in the darkness, casting eerie shadows along the path as if spirits lurked just beyond the reach of the flames. The shrine stood atop the hill, an ancient structure built from stone that bore the marks of time. Its entrance was draped with woven charms, bones, and cowries that rattled softly in the night breeze. The scent of burning herbs filled the air, a thick, intoxicating aroma that made the queen's stomach churn. "Enter," a voice rasped from within. King Ezioka led the way, his grip tightening around the hilt of his sword as they stepped inside. The oracle sat in the center of the dimly lit chamber, her eyes milky white, her fingers tracing the patterns on the cowrie shells before her. Her skin was wrinkled like the bark of an old tree, and yet there was something in her presence that was beyond human, something ancient, something knowing. The queen lowered herself onto her knees. "Great One, we come seeking your wisdom." The oracle's blind eyes turned toward her, though it felt as if she saw everything. "You seek a child," she murmured, voice as dry as leaves in the Harmattan wind. "The gods have heard your cries." A flicker of hope passed between the king and queen, but it was short-lived, for the oracle's expression darkened. "But beware, for what the gods give they also mark. This child will not be like others. She will carry the strength of iron and the wrath of the storm. She will be the pride of Umudike, yet she will also be its greatest fear." Queen Nwanika's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, Great One?" The oracle leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "A time will come when the earth will tremble at her feet, when men will cower before her power, and when the blood of kings will stain the ground because of her." The queen's hands trembled. "But she is our child, our heir." The oracle did not blink. "And she is more than that." A heavy silence filled the chamber. King Eziocha, ever the warrior, dismissed the unease curling in his chest. A child of strength, that was a blessing, not a curse. "If the gods have willed it, then so be it," he declared. "Let the child come." The oracle gave no response, only the faintest of smiles, a knowing smile, one that carried the weight of futures yet to unfold. As the king and queen turned to leave, the oracle spoke one last time. "When the full moon rises and the sky burns red, remember my words. Her fate cannot be changed." Not long after their visit to the shrine, whispers spread through the palace. Queen Nwanika was with child. The news spread like wildfire, igniting celebrations across Umudike. The people rejoiced, drums thundered in the market square, and warriors danced in honor of the gods' blessing upon their rulers. But the queen's pregnancy was unlike any other. In the early months, she was plagued by vivid dreams. Dreams of fire and war, of a great beast roaring in the darkness, of a child standing alone against an unseen force. She awoke each night drenched in sweat, her hands trembling as the echoes of the dreams lingered in her mind. And then there was the hunger. Her appetite grew insatiable, yet it was not for the rich meats and fruits of the royal kitchen. She craved the bitter roots used by warriors before battle, the kind that gave strength and clarity. She craved the marrow of bones, the flesh of game hunted fresh. The palace healers exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. After all, this was the child of prophecy. And then came the movements. Most unborn children kicked softly within their mother's womb. But Adama did not kick. She pushed, she stretched, she fought. At times, it felt as if she was wrestling with unseen forces even before she was born. "The child is strong," the healers said, but there was an unease in their voices, a wariness they dared not voice aloud. Then, on the night of the full moon, when the sky was painted in an eerie shade of crimson, Queen Nwanika went into labor. The palace walls trembled with the queen's cries as the midwives rushed to her side. The room was filled with the scent of burning incense, meant to ward off evil spirits, but the air felt thick, heavy with something unseen, something watching. Outside, the sky burned red, just as the oracle had foretold. It was not a gentle birth. It was a battle. The queen's body shuddered under the force of the child emerging into the world, her fingers clawing at the sheets as if she herself were fighting against the prophecy unfolding. And then, in a final push, a cry shattered the air, a cry unlike any other. It was deep, powerful, reverberating through the palace like a war horn. The midwives froze. Even the king, who had paced outside the chamber with his warriors, felt his heart skip a beat. Inside, the queen gasped as she looked upon her newborn daughter. Adama was no ordinary child. Her body, though small, bore the unmistakable signs of strength. Her arms and legs were firm, her fingers curled into tight fists that gripped with unnatural force. Her eyes, dark, piercing, almost knowing, studied the world around her with an intensity no infant should possess. The midwife who held her shuddered as Adana's tiny fingers latched onto her wrist too tightly. She is strong," the woman whispered, prying her wrist free with difficulty. King Eziaka stepped into the chamber, his breath catching at the sight of his daughter. A warrior's heart swelled within him. This was no weak heir. This was a child forged by the gods themselves. "She will be great," he declared, lifting Adana high. "She will be the might of Umudike." The warriors cheered. The palace roared with celebration. But in the shadows, the old priestess of Arachuku sat in silence, her blind eyes fixed on the sky. The full moon still glowed red, and deep within the forest beyond the kingdom, something stirred. Something ancient, something waiting, for the child had been born, and fate had begun to turn. What fate awaits this child? What unseen forces are tied to her birth? Why did the moon turn red on the night of her arrival? Adana grew swiftly, her body developing at a pace that astounded the royal physicians. By the time she could walk, her steps were not the unsteady, stumbling movements of an ordinary child. No, she moved with the surety of a warrior, her balance impeccable, her grip on objects unnaturally firm. By the age of 3, she could lift objects that even grown men struggled to carry. Servants whispered among themselves after witnessing her pick up a clay water pot twice her size and carry it across the courtyard as if it were a mere basket of fruit. Her strength was not merely surprising, it was unnerving. She was beautiful too, stunning in a way that made the villagers pause when she passed. Her skin gleamed like polished ebony, her eyes held an intense, almost knowing depth, and her hair flowed in thick, dark waves down her back. But it was not just her beauty that made her unforgettable. It was her presence. There was something about Princess Adana that made people hesitate before speaking in her presence. Something in the way she stood, straight-backed, chin lifted, as though she already knew the weight of destiny resting on her shoulders. And then there was her strength. At 5 years old, Adana watched a group of young boys wrestling in the training courtyard of the palace. She tilted her head, intrigued by their movements, when one of the boys, twice her size, boasted that no one could take him down. Adana stepped forward. "I can," she said simply. The boy laughed, but before he could react, Adana moved. She grasped him by the arm and threw him over her shoulder with ease, sending him sprawling into the dust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The warriors who had been observing the children exchanged uneasy glances. It was unheard of. A girl, a princess, displaying such raw, effortless power. After that day, the boys refused to play with her. By the time she was 8, even the palace guards avoided sparring with her. Though she was just a child, she possessed the strength of a grown warrior. During training sessions, she shattered wooden practice swords with a single blow. When she struck a target dummy, it did not merely sway, it splintered. The king, though proud, began to notice the growing unease within his people. He heard the whispers of the palace maids, the hurried murmurs of the elders. The gods did not intend for a woman to have such power. She is not natural. And worse, she is cursed. At first, the rumors were quiet, spoken only in hushed voices behind closed doors. But as Adana grew, so did the whispers. They said she had been born under a blood moon, a sign of ill fate. They said no man would ever be able to control her. They said she was not merely a child of Umudike, but something else. She was not meant to be born, one old woman hissed as she clutched her charms. She is an omen. The queen dismissed such talk, but deep in her heart she worried. Her daughter was different, too different. And though Adana was kind and wise beyond her years, her very presence unsettled those around her. When she was 10, a nobleman from a neighboring kingdom came to visit. He brought his son, a boy of 13, strong and trained in the ways of battle. "I hear your daughter is a fierce warrior," the nobleman said to King Ezioka. "My son is a skilled fighter. Perhaps they can spar." The king hesitated, then agreed. Perhaps if others saw that Adana was not unnatural, that she was simply well trained, the whispers would die down. The courtyard was filled with onlookers as the nobleman's son stepped forward, wooden sword in hand. Adana took her place before him, a calm expression on her face. The boy struck first, aiming a swift blow toward her side. He never landed it. Adana moved like the wind. She caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it effortlessly, and knocked him to the ground in a single movement. The spectators gasped. The nobleman's son groaned, gripping his arm, his face red with embarrassment and pain. "This is not normal," the nobleman muttered, his eyes wary as he looked at Adana. "She fights like a demon." He left that very night, refusing the king's offer of hospitality. The whispers turned into fear. By the time Adana turned 16, the time had come for her to receive suitors. Other princesses of her age had already begun preparing for marriage, their fathers fielding offers from noblemen and warriors seeking alliances. But for Adana, there were none. Not because she lacked beauty, not because she lacked intelligence, because she was feared. The few men who dared to approach the palace would find excuses to leave after merely witnessing her. A visiting prince once saw her lift a fallen tree trunk with her bare hands and ride her horse without saddle or bridle, moving with a skill no warrior could match. He left before the sun had set. Another suitor, the son of a wealthy chief, watched her break a clay pot with a single squeeze of her hand. He returned to his village and refused to speak of her again. Even the bravest warriors hesitated. What man wished to stand beside a wife who could best him? "What will she do to a husband if she is angered?" they whispered. "She is more warrior than woman. She will never find a husband." The king, now weary with concern, could not ignore the truth. No man in Umudike was willing to take Adana as his wife. And so the elders gathered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the palace, a secret meeting was held in the king's private chambers. The elders, their faces lined with age and wisdom, spoke in hushed voices. "This cannot continue," one of them said. "A princess must marry. She must bear children to continue the royal bloodline." "But who?" another asked. "No man will have her." The room fell silent. Then one of the oldest elders, a man who had seen many reigns, spoke softly. "There may be another way." The king frowned. "Speak." The elder hesitated, then said, "There are places beyond Umudike, kingdoms where men are not afraid of power. Perhaps we should seek her match elsewhere." The queen's breath caught. "You mean to send her away?" The elder shook his head. "Not yet. But if no man in this land will have her, then perhaps her fate lies beyond our borders." A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the sky darkened, and far beyond the palace walls, in the deepest part of the forest, something ancient stirred, something that had been waiting since the night Adama was born, something that knew she was different, and that she was meant for more than a throne. Is her strength supernatural? Is her fate tied to something beyond Umudike? What force watches from the shadows? The moon hung heavy in the sky, its glow illuminating the stone walls of the palace. Inside the royal chambers, Queen Nena sat in silence, her hands trembling as she traced the intricate carvings on the wooden chair beside her. She had kept this secret for years, locked it away in the deepest chambers of her heart. But she could not keep it hidden forever. The whispers had grown louder. The fear in the eyes of the people had become impossible to ignore. And now, even her own husband, the great King Ezioka, was beginning to question their daughter's existence. Queen Nena turned to the king, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is something I must tell you." King Ezioka studied her, concern flickering across his regal face. "What is it, Nena?" She hesitated, looking toward the window, where the full moon bathed the courtyard in silver light. "The night before Adana was conceived," she began, her voice heavy with memory, "I made a deal." The words sent a chill through the king's spine. "A deal?" The queen's hands clenched into fists. "I was desperate. After years of barrenness, after countless sacrifices to the gods, I feared I would never bear a child. So I sought the guidance of the oldest oracle in the land." The king remained silent, his heartbeat quickening. "She told me that my child, our child, was already destined for greatness, but..." The queen swallowed hard. "She warned me that Adana would not be like other children. She said my daughter would be born with strength beyond imagination, that she would shake the very foundations of our kingdom." King Ezucha's jaw tightened. "And what did she ask of you in return?" The queen's eyes darkened. "She told me that Adana's fate would be written in the blood of warriors, that her strength would be a gift and a curse, and she made me promise." The queen's voice cracked. "She made me promise that when the time came, I would not stand in the way of destiny." The king's breath caught in his throat. "And you agreed?" Queen Nena nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I did not know what it meant at the time. I only knew that I wanted a child." A heavy silence settled between them. King Eziocha rose from his seat, pacing the chamber. "And now," he demanded, "now that our daughter is feared by her own people, now that no man will claim her as his wife, what do you think this destiny truly is?" The queen's heart ached. She had seen the way people looked at Adana, the awe, the fear, the whispers behind her back, and yet she had also seen the loneliness in her daughter's eyes, the quiet understanding that she was different. "I don't know," Queen Nena whispered, "but I fear the time is near." The next morning, the royal council gathered in the palace. The elders, dressed in their flowing robes of deep blue and gold, sat in a semicircle before the throne. Their faces were lined with wisdom and worry. One of the eldest, a man called Obioma, stepped forward, bowing deeply before the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice grave, "the people of Umudike are troubled. There are rumors that your daughter's strength is unnatural, that she is a danger to our traditions." The king's expression remained unreadable. "Adana is my daughter. She is of royal blood." "Yes," another elder agreed, "but she is unlike any princess we have ever known. A woman of such strength, it is unnatural. It defies the order of the gods." Queen Nena tensed. "Are you suggesting that my daughter is cursed?" Obioma hesitated before speaking. "We are suggesting that she must be controlled." A murmur spread through the chamber. The queen's heart pounded. "Controlled? What does that mean?" Another elder stepped forward. "We must ensure that her strength does not bring ruin upon our people. If she cannot find a husband, if she cannot be tamed by love, then..." The elder hesitated, his next words hanging in the air like a guillotine. "Then she must be restrained." The queen's blood ran cold. "Restrained?" King Eziosha's voice was sharp with warning. "Your Majesty, we do not suggest this lightly," Obioma said carefully. "We fear that her power may one day challenge even the throne itself. The people are uneasy. They whisper of omens, of prophecies." The queen's nails dug into her palm. The prophecy. They did not know the full truth. They did not know the price she had paid to bring Adana into this world. "Her strength must be bound," another elder said. "Perhaps there is a way to suppress it, through spiritual means, through ritual." Queen Nena's vision blurred with rage. "You would dare to take away my daughter's very essence. You would make her weak just to ease your own fears." "Better weak than feared," one elder murmured. A silence followed, thick with tension. Finally, King Eziosha spoke. His voice was heavy with unspoken emotion. "I will not make a decision lightly. Adana is not a threat. She is my daughter, and she will not be caged like a beast." Obioma pressed his lips together, but nodded respectfully. "Then, Your Majesty, at least consider this. If she cannot be controlled here, then perhaps it is time she seeks her fate elsewhere." The queen stiffened. "You mean exile?" "I mean that the longer she stays in Umudike, the more fear will grow," Obioma said gravely. "And fear, my queen, turns to hatred faster than you think." The words settled over them like a dark cloud. That night, the queen lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her chamber. She had thought she was protecting Adana by keeping the truth hidden. But now she wondered if she had only set her up for disaster. Her daughter's strength was not just feared, it was resented. And if the elders were right, if the prophecy was truly coming to pass, then the worst was yet to come. In the darkness of the palace, far away from her mother's turmoil, Adana sat in the courtyard, staring at the moon. She had heard the whispers. She knew what the people said about her. But as she sat beneath the night sky, an unsettling feeling stirred deep within her chest. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Something that would change everything. What was the full extent of the Queen's deal? What would happen if Adana's strength was bound? And what force was drawing closer to claim its due? The sun hung high over the kingdom of Umudike, casting a golden glow upon the palace grounds. A heavy silence loomed as King Ezioka stood before the gathered crowd, his robes billowing slightly in the afternoon breeze. Every noble, warrior, and commoner who could fit into the great courtyard had assembled. They knew why they had been summoned. The king raised his staff, and the murmuring ceased. His deep voice carried across the crowd. "It is time," he declared, his piercing gaze scanning the sea of faces before him. "The time has come for my daughter, Princess Adama, to find a husband." A ripple of tension moved through the people. The mere mention of the princess's name brought both admiration and unease. She was beautiful, intelligent, and of noble birth. But she was also powerful. Too powerful. Men glanced at one another, gauging the reaction of their peers. The bravest among them stood still, their jaws tight with a forced confidence. Others swallowed nervously, shifting their weight uncomfortably. The king's voice cut through the apprehension. To prove his worth, a suitor must pass a series of trials, he continued. These trials will test not just strength, but courage, wisdom, and resilience. Only he who succeeds shall win Adana's hand in marriage. Gasps and hushed whispers filled the air. A competition? It was unheard of for a princess of Umudike to be won through battle. But then again, Adana was no ordinary princess. Deep in the crowd, young men from noble families, warriors, merchants, and sons of respected elders exchanged uneasy glances. "She's stronger than most men," someone muttered. "She is a woman," another scoffed, trying to mask his nervousness. How hard could it be? But those who had witnessed Adana's strength firsthand said nothing. They remembered the time she had lifted an entire cart that had trapped a young boy beneath it. They recalled the day she had wrestled a grown warrior to the ground, as though he were a child. They had seen her hands split thick logs with a single strike. They knew the truth. None of them could best her in combat. And if the trials involved fighting her, then the winner would not be the strongest man, but the one who was willing to risk humiliation in front of the entire kingdom. Even those with great ambition hesitated. To fail publicly would be disgraceful. To win, well, what man wanted a wife who could break his bones with a single embrace? The king's herald stepped forward, unrolling a long parchment. "In 3 days, the competition shall begin. Let all who seek the hand of Princess Adana present themselves before the royal court at dawn." The words echoed in the courtyard, but no one stepped forward. Not yet. All eyes turned to Adana, who stood tall beside her father, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in a flowing red and gold robe, her dark hair woven into thick braids, her features as sharp as carved stone. Her muscular arms, visible beneath the thin fabric of her sleeves, flexed slightly as she crossed them over her chest. She could see the hesitation in their faces, the way they avoided looking directly at her. It was no surprise. She had seen it many times before. But this was different. This was not just whispered rumors or stolen glances. This was open fear, and it stung. That evening, as the palace halls grew quiet, Queen Nenna found her daughter standing alone by the garden's reflecting pool. The queen approached gently. "How do you feel?" Adana did not look away from the water. "Does it matter?" Nenna sighed, moving to stand beside her. "You knew this would happen." Adana turned her head slightly, her dark eyes meeting her mother's. "Then why bother with the competition? Why force men to come forward when they already fear me?" The queen hesitated. "Because fear is not the same as weakness. A true warrior does not let fear dictate his choices. If a man truly wishes to stand by your side, he will find the strength to face you." Adana's gaze returned to the water. The moon had begun to rise, its silver reflection rippling with every small movement of the pool. "You have always been different," her mother continued, "and different does not mean alone." Adana exhaled slowly. "I hope you're right." Elsewhere, in the private chambers of noble families and warriors' quarters, quiet discussions unfolded. "This is madness," one young noble grumbled. "How do they expect us to win against her?" "There must be a trick to it," another mused. "Perhaps we do not have to fight her directly. Maybe there will be other tests." One of the older warriors leaned forward, his voice low. "Or perhaps we must think beyond strength. Women can be won with words, with strategy." The others listened carefully. "What do you mean?" "Adana may be strong, but she is still a woman. She has a heart, desires. If we cannot defeat her in battle, then we must defeat her in spirit." A murmur of agreement passed between them. Not all victories were won with fists. And so, as the kingdom of Umudike prepared for the grand competition, plans were being made. Some suitors trained harder, sharpening their skills, preparing for the fight. Others sought different ways to win, ways that did not require brute force. But one thing was certain: the trials would not be easy, and Adana, whether she knew it or not, was about to face a challenge unlike any she had encountered before. Who will enter the competition? Will the trials truly test strength alone? Or is something more sinister at play? Will any man dare to challenge Adana with sincerity? Or will deceit rule the contest? Night had draped its dark cloak over Umudike, and the palace, usually filled with gentle murmurs of quiet activity, lay shrouded in a heavy, uneasy silence. In the stillness of the royal gardens, beneath the ancient baobab tree, whose gnarled roots twisted deep into the earth, Adana found herself drawn by an inexplicable pull. It was as if the night itself whispered secrets only she could hear. A slender figure draped in robes that seemed woven from the fabric of twilight emerged from the shadows. Her eyes, though clouded with age, shone with an intensity that belied the frailty of her appearance. In the quiet solitude of long night, with only the ghostly voices as company, Adana felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The voices were not malevolent in tone, yet their insistence was unnerving. They seemed to offer a glimpse into a future filled with challenges, choices, and consequences that she had never imagined. The bracelet on her wrist shone faintly in the moonlight, a silent testament to the bond it now shared with her destiny. As the night wore on, the whispers began to recede, leaving behind a lingering silence that was almost as unsettling as the murmurs themselves. Adana remained awake for hours, her mind awash with questions. Who was calling her name? Were the voices those of benevolent guardians or vengeful spirits? And what secret did the bracelet hold? A key to unlocking her true potential? Or a curse that would draw calamity upon her and the kingdom of Umudike? Before dawn, when the first hints of light began to tint the horizon, the whispers faded into the background, leaving Adana with a profound sense of foreboding. She rose slowly, the weight of the bracelet still palpable on her wrist, and resolved that she must seek answers. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, with the memory of the seer's warning and the spectral voices etched deep within her, Adana vowed to unravel the mystery of the bracelet and the destiny that now loomed over her like an impending storm. The night had unveiled its secrets, yet it had also deepened the mystery surrounding her very existence. In the silence that followed, as the palace stirred to life with the coming day, Adana's thoughts were consumed by the echoes of that eerie night. The bracelet pulsed once more, as if in silent acknowledgement of her unspoken promise. And somewhere in the far reaches of Umudike, hidden in the labyrinth of fate and forgotten lore, the answers waited, guarded by whispers and shadows, ready to reveal a truth that could change the course of history. And with that, this part of Adana's legendary journey comes to a breathtaking close. But this is not the end. Far from it. The next part will take you even deeper into a world of adventure, mystery, and shocking twists you never saw coming. What new challenges await? What secrets remain untold? You won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter. It's bigger, bolder, and more suspenseful than ever. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the legend alive. See you in the next adventure. Stay tuned.